The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Nicole Caban. I'm the Education and Training Coordinator for Florida Literacy Coalition. So before we get started, I want to show you some of your tools. On the right-hand side, you should see your control panel. On your control panel, you'll see a couple of icons that are going to be important throughout the webinar. First, your red arrow key, which is located up at the top on the left-hand side of your control panel, docks the panel. If you'd like to put it away while listening to the webinar, you just press that button and press it again to bring your control panel back out. You're also going to have a hand raise icon on your panel. It's a little button that looks like a hand. Typically, we don't answer questions in the way of the hand raise icon. I'll show you how we do questions in a little bit. But if I were to ask you a question to get a quick poll and ask you to raise your hand, you just press that button. For instance, if I say, how many of you can hear me? Please raise your hand. So you just press that hand icon right now. Perfect. Yep. Okay. So the hand icon is going to be for quick polls. So the questions box is going to be towards the bottom of your control panel. There you can open it up and you can ask some questions for the presenter. If you have any technical issues, you can also put it through there and I can answer your question privately. Also, you will be prompted to do polls throughout the webinar. So that's pretty simple. Up on your screen, it's going to pop up with a couple of questions or a question, and you just answer true and false for the questions. Last, you have some handouts at the bottom of your control panel. Those are 3 handouts. We have the presentation there, plus a couple of extra resources. So you can just click on those at any time throughout the presentation to download those. And don't worry if you miss it. I can always follow up with an email, and I can send you all the handouts in an email as well. But if you want to refer to the handouts now, you have that available. All right. So today's webinar is Educators Combating Human Trafficking. Our presenter is Vania Llovera. Ms. Llovera is a program manager at FSU Center for the Advancement of Human Rights, where she oversees the administrative work of the center. She's been working with the center since 2001. Vania has developed a human trafficking curriculum for the Florida Department of Education and Florida Department of Children and Families. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Vania.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Nicole, and thank you for putting all of this together. Thank you for the organization, the Florida Literacy Coalition, for taking an interest into this topic. I know that this is not a pep talk. This is not a topic that gets anybody excited, but it's one that should concern all of us in every kind of capacity, because at some point or the other, there are situations in which may come up, especially the way that we are seeing this kind of crime all over the place, practically everywhere. So thank you everyone for connecting. Thank you for taking the interest in learning more about this topic, and to being able to learn how we see it in the schools, but also to see how we can take it to our students, empower our students so that they know that this is out there and they know what resources are available out there. We're going to be talking about human trafficking in general, but we're also going to be talking about how to teach our students, inform our students what kind of resources are out there. So we started working on this kind of topic at the Center for the Advancement of Human Rights at Florida State University a very long time ago. In 2002, we were approached by the Department of Children and Families because they had a few dozen victims in South Florida. And at that point, we were under the impression that it was mainly people that were being brought from other countries to the United States who were being taken advantage of, who were forced into any kind of work, and who were exploited for a very long time. Eventually, we learned that it's not only people from abroad, that it is U.S. citizens also being exploited. So let's go over the objectives that we have for this afternoon. Basically, the objectives are that teachers, after this training, they will know if they suspect that there is a student who is a victim of trafficking. And let me tell you that surveying throughout the entire state, we have found out that there are teachers that are serving not only victims because they have been allowed to go to school, but also survivors of human trafficking. Teachers will also recognize traffickers. And the reason that I put that out there is because there have been 2 different schools that have reported that traffickers have pretended to be students in a classroom, and they're really there to recruit. There was in one instance a young guy who was working in the agricultural field, came to his ESOL teacher, and he said, teacher, do you mind if I announce that my boss is looking for more employees? And then after having that discussion with her, he said, well, my boss said that if I recruit more employees, more workers, that my debt is going to be reduced. And so the teacher at that point hadn't had human trafficking training, but once she did, that's a red flag. Why does the employee owns the boss money? And we'll talk more about being indebted in like a workplace and all of that. But also for students need to know how they can be safe, what their rights are. Students, even doesn't matter what kind of immigration status they have in this country, there are some rights that they have, and it's good for us as instructors to be able to relate to the students that kind of information, and where to go and look for more information so that we are empowering our students. And of course, we would give our students the tools so that they don't fall into this work exploitation cycle. So those are our objectives for today. So our students, we work with a population, especially with students who have a language barrier many times. They can be vulnerable in situations in which they are promised, a better life, and they are promised work. Most of the population that we work with as instructors, that's exactly what they want, especially if they come from other countries. They really want to be able to accomplish the American dream, and being able to accomplish the American dream many times can lead them to very difficult situations. And so we're going to be connecting all of that. Many times it's not our students, the ones that are in a risky situation, but our students know the communities, and if we empower them and they know what resources to look for, they are able to inform their own neighbors, their own friends about what's out there. I'll give you a very simple example. At the Center for the Advancement of Human Rights, we not only work with human trafficking, but we work with victims of violent crimes. And as a result of presenting this kind of information to my students, I practically play 2 roles. The one of a service provider, because we provide direct services with the Florida State University Center for the Advancement of Human Rights. And I also teach my students this kind of information. So many times my students are the ones referring clients to the center because they know the resources available out there. So it's great to have the students empower that kind of way, and knowing that they can contribute to the community, knowing how to take what they learn in the classroom and taking it out there and helping other people. And of course, if there is a situation in which authorities need to be informed, teachers will be able to do that with all the resources that we're going to be discussing today. And the ultimate goal, of course, is that student empowerment, being able to integrate themselves into society, into the community here. And I think that this is a very good way of accomplishing that, because they are able to help others as well. So the current goals, the connection with the current goals that we have, basically, since we are teaching English to students of other countries, the reading and the writing and the oral exercises, that's still very important, since that is exactly what they come to us. But it's great that to teach them those kinds of skills in a kind of content that is going to be very helpful to them, something that they are going to be able to apply to their everyday life. You know, the teaching modalities are going to basically be the same. We use all kinds of multiple teaching modalities to teach certain concepts, and that is not going to change with the kind of curriculum that we're going to be discussing. The possible topics that I've integrated human trafficking information in, it's work, health, safety, emergencies, multiculturalism, which we always discuss, because I think it is very important to incorporate their culture, bring aspects of their culture, and also looking at comparing and finding the similarities between their culture and the culture that we have in the U.S. Things like President's Day, those are topics that we always cover, and it's so easy to incorporate information on slavery in the past, for example, and slavery nowadays, and how you see it in the present. I don't know about other counties, but in Leon County, we have a whole section that we have to present on sexual harassment, and it is very easy to incorporate human trafficking, especially when it comes to the sex industry of human trafficking. It's very easy to incorporate that kind of information. Civics and citizenship, that's always also a very good way of incorporating it. So these are only a list of the few areas in which I have incorporated human trafficking. And by the way, if you have any questions, please type your questions. Nicole has graciously offered to look at the questions for us, and she will be queuing us in if we need to answer any of those questions immediately, or she'll determine whether we're going to answer those questions at the very end. I know this is a very intense topic, and I would like to get your feedback. I would like to answer any questions that you may have. So what is human trafficking exactly? Human trafficking is just a modern form of slavery. And it's a modern form because it can be right before our eyes. And we may not know that someone is a victim of human trafficking or has been a victim of human trafficking. We have two different areas in the state of Florida and all over the country, all over the world that we discuss. And that is, human trafficking involves the exploitation of people in commercial sex and forced labor. It is a very serious crime. It is a crime that exists everywhere. Florida being where it is because of its location and is the industry that drives our economy, it's number 3 in the entire country. This is only followed, we only follow New York and California, which is very, very scary, very sad to think that, that we are number 3. Well, why is it number 3? If you think about what drives our economy in the state of Florida, tourism is big. And in tourism, there is just so much opportunity for people to be exploited in both, in commercial sex as well as forced labor. Well, commercial sex, basically with everyone, foreign victims of human trafficking as well as U.S. citizens. U.S. citizens, not only adults, but also children. Forced labor, the same thing. A lot of people are brought to the United States with promises of a better life under many times contracts other times undocumented. We see that a lot of the different areas are not able to find enough workers, U.S. citizen workers, and so they end up having to bring workers from other countries for a short period of time, usually for a high season of anything, whether that be in the touristic area or whether that be in agriculture. And as we discussed, Florida is really high on both of those industries. So let's keep going. Let me show you a quick video. This is about, the are we experiencing difficulty with the internet? Nicole, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Vanya. I can.
Hello? Okay, I just got a message that popped up on my screen that says that I may have experienced difficulties connecting. So I'm hoping that that's false warning and that everyone is able to hear me. Okay, so I'm going to play the video for you. This is a video that is going to talk a little bit more of what we have been discussing. It's only a minute long.
And today I want to discuss an issue that relates to each of these challenges. It ought to concern every person because it is a debasement of our common humanity. It ought to concern every community because it tears at our social fabric. It ought to concern every business because it distorts markets. It ought to concern every nation because it endangers public health and fuels violence and organized crime. I'm talking about the injustice, the outrage of human trafficking.
It's good that you're meeting with Jake because he is one of those powerful. I've heard
I hope that just reinforce what we have been talking about. It is a horrific crime. Every agency, everyone should be concerned about it. It's just everywhere. These are just some of the statistics that I wanted to share with you, and it varies from entity to entity. I know that on the video you saw that 27 million victims worldwide. This came directly from the Polaris Project. The Polaris Project is the one that has been tasked with collecting information nationwide on victims of human trafficking in the United States, but they also look at different stats worldwide. And it is very scary. My motto is no matter how few victims we have, it is one too many. If we have one victim of trafficking in our area, is one too many, because this crime shouldn't be happening. People shouldn't be experiencing slavery. slavery was supposed to be done and away with a very long time ago. And as you can see, women and children, from the stats that I have that I'm showing you on the screen, they are the ones that are at higher risk. Not to say that there aren't men, but women and children are absolutely the ones that are at most risk. Women and girls are even at a higher risk. It's just really scary to think that 80% of trafficking cases in the United States also involve American citizens. So a lot of people, as I was telling you before, think that this only happens to people from other countries, and it's not the case. We have so many U.S. citizen victims of trafficking. I'm part of an organization called the Survive and Thrive Advocacy Center. It's an organization that, it's a nonprofit organization that works directly with victims of trafficking. I'm part of that board. I'm also part of the Big Bend Coalition Against Human Trafficking, and it's the coalition that we have that comes together with information on the whole Big Bend area. And it is really depressing to hear that we find more and more, and the more we train, the more victims are identified, because as I was telling you, they can be right before our eyes and we don't even know that they are victimized. Human trafficking is only second to drug trafficking. That's really scary too. If you think about drugs and arms, for example, they are purchased, they're sold, and it ends right there. Human trafficking stats, more of that. It is very scary to also think that many of the US citizens that are being forced into the sex industry really the recruitment starts at 12, from 12 to 14 years of age. And that's something, a stats that is put out there. The accuracy is just based on different cases that have been seen all over the United States, not just here in Florida, but all over. And it's just very, very depressing to see the stats. I'm not going to dwell in the stats because, as I was telling you, it's not how many victims, is that this crime shouldn't even exist. So even one victim is one too many. Okay, this is one of the questions that I have. Nicole, is the poll going to appear on this?
Yes, I'm going to launch the poll right now.
Okay.
Okay, the poll is launched. So we'll just wait a few minutes while people kind of answer, or about 30 seconds.
Okay.
Okay, I think mostly everyone has answered, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results.
Okay.
Okay, so it looks like there's 7% for true and 93% for false.
Okay. And it is, of course, false. Human trafficking, as we mentioned a little bit, already exists everywhere. It exists here in the United States. It exists in small cities and big cities and suburbs and rural areas. It exists everywhere. It could be right next to you. I will share a story. When we started doing this kind of work in 2002, as I mentioned to you, the Department of Children and Families contacted us, asking us to interview the victims because they wanted to find out the stories from the victims. What exactly led to their exploitation? What exactly led to them falling under the traps of these traffickers? So we interviewed them. We had the privilege of talking to them and finding out this was the very first report that was produced that looked at the perspective from the victim side. And that report, by the way, is on the Center for the Advancement of Human Rights website. It's called Florida Response to Human Trafficking. We completed the research between 2002 to 2003 and then produced the report in 2004. When we completed the report, we started communicating with like different state agencies, different law enforcement agencies to offer training, because this is a topic that is very connected to the mission that we have at the Center for the Advancement of Human Rights. And one, I'm not going to mention names, of course, but one of the heads, very high up head in the government in Florida, here in Tallahassee, told us, oh, no, we don't really need to train anyone here in Tallahassee. I mean, in Tallahassee, we only have state employees. In Tallahassee, we only have students. It's not an area or a subject that we should be concerned about. Now, if you ask me, he said, if you ask me, let's go ahead and do training in like Orlando and Miami and Tampa, I am not joking with you. Maybe about a month or two after we had this discussion with this leader, there was a human trafficking ring that came to light 2 blocks from his own house. And at that point, it was right on his backyard. At this point, it was one area of concern. So if you can imagine, for someone with that kind of leadership, he was living in a high up neighborhood, and this is exactly where the victims were being kept. It was not where the activity took place. It became one of the biggest rings, sex trafficking rings, that was discovered in the state of Florida. Why? Because not only was it taking place here in Tallahassee, but they had different connections in Tampa, in Jacksonville, in Orlando, in Miami, in West Palm. They had connections, and it was a whole ring. And what would happen is that the victims were rotated between those cities so that they would never develop any kind of connection with anyone, and they would never know exactly where they were. So it can happen basically anywhere. During this study, we too found out that there was this huge case in the Palatka area. If you are not familiar with where Palatka is, it's very close to Jacksonville. It's a very rural town, and basically families know each other there. They grew up together, and the people that are well off, are well recognized in that community. There was this family called the Evans family, and they had a huge farm in which they had a farm of potatoes and cabbage. And so they strategized ways of getting workers, and of course, very cheap labor. So what they decided to do is they decided to go all around Florida and go to homeless shelters. At those homeless shelters, what they were targeting were men who were addicted to drugs or alcohol. And they would promise the homeless men exactly what they wanted. They wanted work, they wanted a shelter, they wanted meals throughout the day. And that's exactly what they were promised. And so they were brought to this, what we call labor camps, and they were housed there. The labor camp, of course, belonging to the same family. And what was identified, this is after the whole investigation took place, is that there was it was fenced all over so people couldn't get out. And not only that, but on the very top, in many properties, there's barbed wire and a way to keep people from the outside coming in. That was not the case at this labor camp. It was to keep people inside so that they wouldn't be able to get out. And this was exactly what they wanted, the workers. But it didn't stop there. What the family also was doing is that they were paying these workers at the end of the day with crack, cocaine, and alcohol. So at the end of the week, basically these workers were indebted to the family because they would consume more than they would earn, and they were beaten, they were starved. This happened for many months before it was identified that this was happening at that farm. So it's as you can see that it's not just any set of people that can be victims of this crime. Basically anybody can be a victim of this crime, and it's happening right here in the U.S. This last case that I just mentioned to you happened to U.S. citizen men, not to men from other countries, but U.S. citizen men. And it was because of the addiction that they had. The family knew that they could exploit the group of men that way. Why is it lucrative? As we mentioned before, it yields so much money. Traffickers make money off of people like they can't with any other industry. Why exactly is that? Let's go back to the drugs. Let's go back to the arms. When we have traffickers of those, they obtain the product, they sell the product, and then the transaction ends. Then they have to look for more product. However, a human being can be exploited again and again. The women that we interviewed back in 2002, they were telling us that they were forced to have sex with about 30 to 40 men a day. Day after day after day, they are exploited. The supply practically for the traffickers is endless, and that's how they make so much money off of people. Same thing for people working in the farms, like I mentioned the case in Palatka. Those workers were there for many hours every day, and they were used day after day after day with the excuse that they continue to own more money to the family because of the drug and alcohol consumption that they had on a daily basis. It's really scary to think how people are manipulated. You know, what are the elements? Well, in order for something to be considered a human trafficking case, there has to be 3 different elements. There has to be a process, and look very carefully at what it says. It doesn't say end. It can be recruiting or harboring or moving or obtaining a person. There has to be a means. There has to be force, fraud, or coercion, and there has to be an end. What is the end purpose of this activity? If all of this takes place, then it is considered a human trafficking case. Well, guess what? During the investigations, it's so hard to determine that or to get all of this information, because many times the victims, because of all the trauma that they have endured during the entire victimization, it is very hard for them to be reliable witnesses and to remember everything. And many times they remember pieces here and pieces there. They're not able to put a whole story together. So these kinds of cases are very hard to prove. And a lot of the cases that have been identified in the state of Florida have not been prosecuted necessarily under human trafficking, but there are other underlying crimes that may not necessarily give the kind of sentencing to the traffickers that should be in place, but at least they're able to get them under something. I do want to clarify one thing. So for victims that are under the age of 18 who are forced into prostitution, they do not need to show any of this. So they do not need to show that there is a means. They do not need to show that there is force, fraud, or coercion. think about it as statutory rape. A child cannot consent to a sex act. It doesn't matter what kind of sex act it is. A child cannot consent. That's something very important to think about, because so many of our children are victims. They many times, for example, teenage runaways, they would be proposed by basically anybody to have their needs met. For example, if they need a place to stay for that night. If it is an exchange of some kind of sex act, it is considered human trafficking. If a child needs a meal, but it is under the condition of having some kind of exchange for a sex act, it is human trafficking. As long as the child is under the age of 18, if there is any kind of exchange, it doesn't have to be money. It can be for something that they need, clothes, or we see many times that teens end up getting like cell phones and accessories and getting their nails done. We see this all the time, and it is considered human trafficking as if it's in exchange for some kind of sex act. So for children under the age of 18, there does not need to be any force, fraud, or coercion for it to be considered human trafficking. We see it all the time happening. So why do we say that there are invisible chains in modern day slavery? Many times there isn't any physical force. Many times what there is this psychological manipulation that the traffickers have on their victims. I will give you an example on the case in Palarca. There were beatings many times, but other times it was only, you owe me money. You've been consuming drugs and you have to continue to work. Pimps, for example, many times pimps, they don't have to even physically abuse anyone for that person to be controlled. We see this many times with children that have experienced abuse in the home. They are dying for some kind of love. They are dying for some kind of attention. So what happens many times is that the pimps, they know this. And so they pretend to be this super, super nice person and provide any of whatever that child is starving for, whether it's love, whether it's attention, whether it's material things, and they provide for a certain period of time until that child trusts that what they call friend or boyfriend. Many times they call him daddy. When they have that trust, they don't even have to touch them physically. It's just by telling them what to do. Many times they don't even have to be present to collect any money in order for that child to comply. This doesn't only happen with children. We also see it with grown people that are manipulated this way. Traffickers really know how to manipulate, and they don't have to use any physical force in order to accomplish that. We see this, the coercion part. We see it so much with victims of human trafficking from foreign countries too. We have seen it with workers who come under a temporary basis. Their documents are taken away. There are threats of deportation. What happens with the temporary workers is that they are tied to working with the company that brought them. They cannot go work for anyone else. And so if the intention is to enslave them, it's very difficult for them to really break from that cycle. And that's why we see a lot of abuse in that area. So let's do another true or false question based on what we have been discussing. Nicole, are you running the poll right now?
Hold on one second. I'm going to launch it right now. Let's see. Okay, the poll is launched. And I'll give it about 30 seconds for everyone to answer. In the meantime, Vanya, we did get a question.
Okay.
So the question is, you mentioned that Florida ranks number 3 behind California and New York. Florida also
Yes.
ranks 3 behind these states in overall population. How does Florida rank on per capita basis?
That's a good question. When it comes to stats, I would have to look at that for you. I'll be happy to look into that a little bit more. When it comes to, we provide direct services to victims, so we focus a lot more on the qualitative kind of research than the quantitative, but I'll be happy to look into that, Nicole, and if you like, I can send you that information.
Sure, I can send that out with the handouts as well. After the,
okay, perfect. Thank you.
So the poll is done. I think pretty much everyone voted, so I'm going to go ahead and share it. Looks like 100% of people say false.
Okay, perfect. And I wanted to overemphasize that because it is something that is very important, that anybody under federal law and also now under Florida law, anyone under the age of 18 who is induced to perform commercial sex acts is a victim of human trafficking. It doesn't matter whether that person was forced or coerced. We see that when we think about these kinds of cases, many times we think girls mainly, and that's because the stats say that the majority of the victims are girls, but we have started seeing more and more men, especially young men in the LGBTQ community. We see that they are being taken advantage of, and as if you think about the dynamics, many times it takes them a very long time to disclose their preference and their orientation. And when they do, they experience a lot of rejection, and many times they fall in a situation in which they don't have a place to go, and they use this form of exchange as a survival mechanism. And so we see, unfortunately, this happening more and more. So what are the indicators of human trafficking? Many times there is a lot of control, and I know that's something very tricky, especially with ESOL students because of the language barrier. Many times they have someone to interpret for them a lot of times. And so we need to be very careful as to how we interpret be in control. The inability to move or leave the job. I had someone that took one of my trainings a long time ago, and he called me after some time, and he said, look, there is a friend that I have. This friend is being taken advantage of. This friend is working in the Panhandle area in a hotel, and she's being paid $1 an hour to clean rooms. And so one of the questions that I ask is, it's definitely exploitation, right? Because that doesn't even meet minimum wage. But one of the questions that I ask is, can your friend leave that job and go look for a different job? Or is that friend somehow tied to that job for whatever reason? And he said, no, she can actually leave, but she's not going to be able to find work anywhere else because her visa has expired. And so that wouldn't be considered human trafficking. There is a very fine line between human trafficking and labor exploitation. And there are different sets of rights that apply to people that are victims of work exploitation. So many times there is physical abuse, and you'll see bruises or other signs of being physically abused. Fear and depression can be a sign as well. Someone, that it's non-English speaking, many times we can sense that there is just something not okay. I've had clients who speak very little English, and they are married to U.S. citizens, and you see some sense of control there many times. It might not necessarily be human trafficking, but it could be some kind of exploitation or some form of abuse. And talking more to the person or referring that person to the right organization, they might be able to figure out if there are any other ways to assist. And I'm referring to victims of domestic violence, for example. And we see a lot of that. But we have seen in cases in which it appears that it is domestic violence, and then we end up finding out that it is more like trafficking, and the person is being used in exchange for different getting some kind of profit in exchange of sex acts. We have seen that as well in couples. Someone who has been brought to this country recently but is experiencing something, or there's something iffy there, it is worth exploring a little bit more, asking more. If someone does not have any kind of documentations, normally embassies or consulates are very responsive to providing some kind of documentation for immigrants in this country. And not being able to obtain some identity document from their own consulates or embassies can raise red flags many times. So the lack of those kinds of documents, those could be indicators. There are many other indicators for U.S. citizen victims, for example. Many of them attend school, and if they are constantly absent or unexplained absences. Many times we see like new tattoos in girls, not many times not old enough to get those tattoos on their own. That can be an indicator, or some kind of message on their tattoos, not like a flower or something, but something that indicates that that's not a normal message on a tattoo. All of a sudden someone changes the way of dressing, or the way of behaving, or the relationships they have, or what they have. I'll tell you that for victims of human trafficking, many times it's not necessarily about the money that they may receive, but it's about what the pimps are able to provide them, like the latest cell phone or a tablet or something that they really, really want, or getting their nails done, or getting their hair done, or getting jewelry, or getting trips, many expensive items that they're not able to afford on their own. And that could be some kind of indication. And we think about it more for girls, but if we think about what boys may show up with, the perception changes a little bit, because many times what they think with boys is if they appear to have, a really nice pair of expensive shoes, and they come to school with a really nice new pair of expensive shoes that they cannot afford, many times we think, oh, they must have done some drug exchange, or they're into something iffy. We may not necessarily think that they're victims of human trafficking. Unfortunately, we immediately connect them with some kind of illegal activity, whereas with girls we tend many times to think, oh, that she's getting it from like a man or something, but not necessarily with boys. And that's not the case. As I was telling you, boys are also victims of human trafficking, and we see them more and more. An older boyfriend or an older girlfriend could be an indication as well. I just recently trained bus drivers in Freeport, and one of the things that I was telling them is that they see so much, and they see the kids before they get on the bus at the bus stop, and they see how they're dressed. And many times, they after they're dropped off, many times they're not wearing the same things, and just start watching out for those things. So they get a lot of what many of us probably wouldn't be able to get. But all of those kinds of behaviors, we've had cases in which children have been brought from other countries and they attend regular school, but we see that they are very, very hungry when they get to school, or they seem like malnourished and they're not dressed appropriately according to what the weather is many times. So you start questioning those things, and asking probably more and seeing what resources are out there so that you can start addressing those issues. Signs of any kind of addiction can also be one, especially these kinds of indicators are especially with the younger population. So how do they manipulate the traffickers? Physical abuse can be part of it, but I think that I would definitely stress a lot of the psychological abuse. Drugs and alcohol dependency are used so much. The debt bondage, we see a lot, especially with victims of foreign victims of human trafficking. We see that a lot, or the threats against that person's family or friends. It's a big one as well, and we see that so much with our victims. So who is at risk? Basically anybody can be at risk of being victims of human trafficking. Many times I will highlight that many times we think people from other country, and we have seen a lot of that, but our own youth, teenage runaways. But more recently, we also see what law enforcement are calling community children. These are children that may have learning disabilities. These are children that are seeking some kind of attention from others in the school. And if we think about the connections that many of these traffickers establish, many times they train other teens to be the recruiters. And so they show up at the school, they go to the same classes as what law enforcement are calling community children. And community children are children that basically have a caregiver at home. The caregiver might be working long hours, and then during the time that they're out, they get home from school, and the time that the caregiver gets home, they might be exploited in different ways. Not necessarily just in the sex industry. We've seen some other kids that have been recruited by these organizations, nonprofits supposedly, and they have been asked to go from door to door selling different items without any adult supervision. And we have seen this in many different places, including here in Tallahassee, where I'm located. There has been activity reported in different neighborhoods of children being dropped off. In one occasion, we had children that were coming all the way from Jacksonville, and they were being brought to Tallahassee to sell books. And the story behind that was that they were selling those books so that they would so that the money would be used for their education in college later on. It's very iffy that they would be dropped off in neighborhoods and without any adult supervision. So in summary, basically anybody can be a victim of human trafficking. As long as there is some kind of vulnerability that can be exploited, anybody can be. There was a huge case in Orlando of this young woman who had just finished college, and she ended up graduating during that time that was very difficult to get a job. And she had a baby, and didn't have any food for the baby, didn't have any way of getting anything for the baby. And she ended up getting help from this really nice guy. Well, this really nice guy supposedly came to her rescue. There was another time that she just didn't have any money either, and this guy lent her money so that she could repair her car. There was this last time that she was found shoplifting, and this guy also came to her rescue. But this time it was not to just do her a favor. She needed to pay back, and one of the ways that she had to pay back is that she was going to be advertised on a website called Backpage. By the way, Backpage is a big website that is used to do these kinds of ads, even though there is, they have taken down the whole area of escorts. There are ways that they are still able to do these kinds of ads. And so she would be advertised on Backpage, and the trafficker would keep her baby every single night. And not until she came with a certain amount that next day, she would be allowed to have her baby back. And that's the way he manipulated her. He'd never used any kind of physical force against her. It was the baby that kept her going back again and again, because he was keeping the baby, and she was afraid to report it to the authorities because of the kind of manipulation that he used against her. And it was, the baby was going to get hurt. The baby was going to pay for anything that that she didn't pay for. And so this kept her coming back. So as you can see, it's not just someone coming from another country, it's any kind of vulnerability that can be exploited. The traffickers find a way. There is this other short clip that I would like to show you. It talks about human trafficking in schools, because it's, we see
100,000 children are said to be forced into sex trafficking every single year across the country. And the ugly reality is that the demand for young children is extremely high.
Tonight, News 4 troubleshooter Delane Matthew joins us live to explain how some of the victims are being recruited in schools in tonight's troubleshooter investigation. Delane?
Yeah, you know, the big misconception, Evie, is that a lot of these kids are runaways and they're forced to walk the streets at night in this world of sex trafficking. But law enforcement officials say that is not always the case. In fact, they're finding that a lot of kids are being recruited inside the classroom. And so they're reaching out to a brand new group now, teachers.
I'm going to tell you something. If you pay the price, you get what you want. I can get it for you. Really?
This is training video used by Shared Hope International, an agency devoted to fighting domestic minor sex trafficking. Watch as an alleged pimp negotiates the price for his girls with an undercover investigator.
Now, if you want something really young, that 200 I'll cost you. This costs a little more than that.
Sure.
How young you talking? Talk to me.
Well, how young do you have?
Well, I don't think that's younger than 14.
Okay, now 14's good.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Well, you had to add something to that.
Sure.
Many young victims are forced to work at night and go to school during the day, where some victims are even recruited. In May, this 17-year-old high school student in Fort Worth was charged with trafficking after holding a 15-year-old classmate captive while prostituting her for 3 days.
Teachers are our first identifiers. They really are. Children spend so much of their time in school. We are responsible for the children while they're here, and the teachers know them better than anyone.
Southwest ISD is one of the first school districts in Bexar County, training its staff on how to spot victims or even possible recruiters. Nilda Castellanos, a social worker, is leading the charge.
The age of most of the victims of trafficking.
So as you can see, it is really big. It is really big in our schools. I would like to do another poll, Nicole, and I think this is the very last one that I have.
Okay.
Are you able to do it?
Yes. Okay, the poll is launched, and I'll give about 30 seconds to answer.
Mm-hmm. Do we have any other questions in the meantime?
Let me check. We do have a comment. So the advent of legalization of marijuana in the U.S., human traffickers know that this will never be legalized. So as we now know, it's a very lucrative business worldwide.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for the comment.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now. Okay, so this one is human trafficking victims will ask for help. 14% said true, 86% said false.
And it is false. Human trafficking, as we had said, is a very hidden crime. Victims are afraid to ask for help. Just remember the kind of manipulation that the traffickers have on their victims, that they can be out of sight. The traffickers can be out of sight, and they still are able to control the victims. We have seen, especially with Backpage, we have seen that many times, depending on big events. So if there is a major event in any town, those ads in Backpage increase so much. We have seen traffickers that send the victims on their own to a place, and they end up showing later. They don't even have to be physically there in order to control the victims. They have many different ways of manipulating them. And that's why victims will not self-identify. Many times too, especially with our teens, they think that the trafficker is someone who cares about them, someone who they can trust. And many times that's the reason they will not report it. So who are the traffickers? Basically, anybody can be the trafficker. I want to go back to that case the case that I mentioned to you earlier, that huge case. The mastermind behind this whole operation was a 70-year-old grandmother. She was the one that planned the whole thing. She was the one that got the sons involved and everyone in her family involved to do the recruiting and to do the implementation of all the rules that they had at the different brothels. She was the one that planned the whole thing, and she is the one that isn't in prison. Many of the family members who implemented her rules are the ones that are behind this. But we also have seen moms and dads who have some form of addiction, and they unfortunately end up prostituting their own kids. These are male and females that we have seen that are being forced into some kind of either forced sex or forced labor in order to feed that addiction that the parents have. We have seen it with extended relatives as well. And then we see it with very organized crime as well. We have seen the Russian mafia that had this whole operation in the Destin area. They were getting students from the university who were studying hospitality, and they would get them to the U.S., promise them to do a paid internship with them, and then they would end up getting here thinking that they were going to work and do an internship at a Disney resort, and then they ended up being driven to Destin instead, cleaning hotel rooms for $1 an hour. And this happened for a very long time. And it was very, very organized crime of people here that were from the Russian mafia, and also people in Russia who were the recruiters. So we see organized crime, but we also see individuals who profit from all of this. So let's go now to part of the curriculum that I would like to show you. It is good to cover very specific topics, and when I do cover this, and not when I do cover, because I cover it every year. I cover it throughout the entire year. I don't do just one session because there are so many different articles and lots of information and resources out there that you can use. And I would bring in interesting articles throughout the entire year, maybe do an introduction and then continue to reinforce it with articles from the newspaper, something that that is going to seem relevant to your students. You're going to be covering, grammar, conversation, reading and writing, of course, and teaching the material in times of blocks, of course. Providing lots of visuals is always important, especially when we're teaching students from other countries so that they can see concepts in different ways. One thing that I always like to tell everyone, that not only educators, but everyone, is that we need to be familiar with the kinds of resources that we have and the kinds of referrals that are going to take place. Human trafficking cases are very complex and they can be really risky. It isn't as an educator, it's not our job to rescue anyone. That is for law enforcement to do. It is important to provide the resources to our students so that they know who to call. There has to also be a protocol within the school, knowing not when it happens, but before it happens, knowing who to report it to. How is it going to be reported? Who in the school is going to be informed? It is always very important. And maybe if not a school, but a program, finding out exactly what is going to happen in if any of these cases come up within your classrooms, or any kind of situation similar to this comes up in the classroom. It's not good to wait until it happens, but it's good to start thinking, okay, how is this going to be implemented? Taking it to administration and finding out what would be a good process so that you are not violating any of the rules that are in place in your program or the school. I want to provide you with resources, and then we'll talk about a little bit about the curriculum that was developed by our center for the Florida Department of Education. So the FSUCHR stands for the Center for the Advancement of Human Rights. And on our website, we have many of the reports that have been produced on human trafficking. The very first one that I've mentioned, called Florida Response to Human Trafficking. We also have a whole strategic plan, and it talks about how Florida is involved in combating this kind of crime, and recommendations for many different groups. We have just recently produced another report for 5 counties in South Florida, and it talks about the trends. What exactly is it that service providers are seeing? Now, when it comes to the different kinds of resources, so I'm going to move to a browser so that I can show you the resources that you see on the screen, so I can show you right from the different websites. Okay, I have the different websites pulled up already. This is the project that was developed for the Florida Department of Children and Families. It was a 2-year grant that we received, and we trained all over Florida. There was someone who did a lot of the training with me, and we went to what they used to call the regional training centers to do all these kinds of trainings. What we have on here, and you're free to download and to use anything that you would like. We have like sample lesson plans for foundations beginning, and we have for intermediate and advanced. If you look at the intermediate and advanced, we have it broken down into different sections. So we have the lesson plan, but we also have the handouts. In the lesson plans, what you will see, and this is something you can explore on your own. On the lesson plans, you will see like step-by-step procedures, but you'll see the connections that we have also with the different standards. You'll see what the grammatical focus is, what the pronunciation focus, what the vocabulary that you can use, and then you'll see the different kinds of resources over here, but also you'll get the different handouts within the activities that you're going to be doing with the students. So you can download any of this information. We also have a manual that we developed specifically for educators, and over here it gives you more information. I would highly encourage that you take a look at this. It gives you lots of great resources, more information to get educated on the issue of human trafficking. I know that I have been talking really fast to cover a lot of ground. This is just more as to how you can get informed. Rights and remedies as well, things about human trafficking, what human trafficking is, the things to keep in mind, the resources that you can use. All of that is on this website that we developed specifically to help educators and talk about how we can use all of these resources. lots of activities were developed specifically for this project. I would highly encourage you to use them. The other resource that you saw listed on the screen is this one. This is another website that provides you good information on comparing. So what was the slave trade many years ago, and how slaves were treated, and what happened when slavery was abolished? But it questions, is there slavery today? And it goes into all these different sections. So it's very good, a very good resource for educators to use to develop, different lesson plans. I've used it many times with the students, and we come up with different kinds of activities out of these resources, whether it's grammar and of course the reading part of it, but also pronunciation, and lots of good conversation that takes place with these kinds of resources. Another one that was listed on this, and you'll have the list of resources with you on the handouts that Nicole has posted for you. This is another good one, and with students now being able to bring their tablets, or many times we have computers in the classroom, I think this is very interactive, and it can produce a lot of conversation. So on here, on this website, it shows you different countries that produce a lot of the products that we purchase here in the US. And so I'm just going to click on one of the closest ones that we have to the United States. And I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to click something that I have every single morning. I'm going to click on coffee. So I'll look at coffee, and then I'm going to see all the different countries that produce this for the US, right? 12 different countries. And then there are little stories on here, different kind of information that you can read with your students, or you can initiate different conversation classes with them. So you put on there, 9-year-old Diego left his parents and went to work on a coffee farm, earning US $1.50 a day. He was recruited from here to join, and you see that the military, basically. And so you start those kinds of conversations with your student. I think this is a good site to promoting that kind of conversation, getting the opinions from your students. That's one of the websites. And you can make it relevant to, you can make it relevant to them, because then they can click on on the map, something close to their country, maybe information that they didn't necessarily have before about their own countries, or maybe information that they will be able to share more of. So not only are you bringing the information, but your students are also providing a lot of the information, and they tend to be really engaged. I find that students, when they see how relevant it is for them or to them, they're able to speak a little bit more and practice English that way. Another good resource that you have is this one, and this one talks the same thing about just general human rights, which is something that our students should be learning about anyway. And then it goes into modern day slavery. There are whole sets of objectives and student skills and information that you'll be able to access from this particular website. I think it's really, really interesting. There is also a video that you can show them on human trafficking. And please feel welcome to also use the videos that I have on this presentation with your students, because I think it's very important for them to get the information in different ways. This is another really good website, Footprints, and it just talks about just human trafficking, in general, and everything that involves. You can type in your information. Students can also subscribe and get information on human trafficking as well. And as they get the information, you can assign projects to them, discussing human trafficking, and let them present in their projects and everything, especially with the more advanced students. I think I do assign different 3 to 5 minute presentations, and they do absolutely a great job, especially when we're providing the resources for them and for them to look into all of this. Let's see, there was another one. The Florida Department of Education. The Florida Department of Education is really making it a point to train a lot of people on human trafficking. And so they have under the health education area, they have developed a lot of different information. They have a whole section on their website that talks about human trafficking. They have training materials. There are these 2 training kind of recorded webinars that are wonderful for educators. I have taken those trainings myself just to see what other information is being presented around the country. And then they have all these resources here that you can look into a little bit more that I didn't send you because it's just a lot and you can explore on your own a little bit more of it. Now let's go back to the different resources. The resources right here are the ones that I had mentioned to you. Now, engaging the community, it is so important to educate the entire community. This is a crime that we have to fight together. It's not a crime that anybody can fight on their own. I think that everyone needs to be educated on the topic. It's not an exciting topic, but one that is very, very much needed to promote awareness. Thank you so much, I think, for taking the time to attend this webinar. I'm very passionate about informing people about this. I have worked directly with victims, and I know everything that they go through. All of these resources I'm not going to dwell into because this information that you're going to have on the PowerPoint handout itself, but just to know that the Florida Abuse Hotline, it's connected with DCF, and it's they are there. They have been trained on human trafficking. They have the tools to do identification of victims, and so it's very important. There are different films out there. There are different books out there, and again, you're going to have this on the handout, so I'm not going to go a lot into detail of this. This is my contact information, which you will also have on the handout. And Nicole, I think that I may have gone a minute over.
Okay, no, that's great. Thank you so much, Vania. I think that's going to conclude our webinar for today. I just want to ask that you all remember to take the survey. The survey should pop up on your screen once we end the webinar, so please don't forget to take that. Let me just double check to make sure. Okay.
Any questions?
Yeah, it doesn't
that
look
may
like
have
we
come
have
up?
any more questions. If you'd like to ask any questions, please do it right now, or you could always contact us here at FLC, or Vania has her contact information up there. We will be giving out certificates of completion for this webinar. On your survey, there'll be an option for you to enter your email if you would like to receive one. So if you would like one, please, again, don't forget to go to do the survey after the webinar is over. All our webinars, including this one, are going to be up at floridaliteracy.org. You can also look at our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and type in Florida Literacy Coalition, and you should see all our videos, including all our webinars, are also up there. So if you want to review this, just visit back in about a week or so, and we should see the webinar up online. And Vania, did you have anything else? Or
No, I just want to thank everyone, and thank you, Nicole, for facilitating this, for organizing everything.
All right. So with that, I would like to say goodbye to everyone and have a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving.